This is Seek and Explain. Like, comment, and subscribe, and enjoy your stay.
I want you to picture a montage, just of seemingly totally disconnected global events.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
Right, so first, a self-proclaimed shaman. And he's wearing a coyote skin headdress. He's got these horns and red, white, and blue face paint, just screaming as he storms the halls of the United States Capitol.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a vivid one.
Yeah, it's wild. And next, I want you to jump to a quiet, ancient archaeological site in New Hampshire. It's this place known as America's Stonehenge.
Right, I've heard of that.
Well, picture a grieving father there, and he is using power tools to actively vandalize a stone monument.
Jeez.
I know. And finally, cut to a group of Japanese citizens violently breaking into a COVID-19 vaccine clinic right in the middle of Tokyo.
I mean, honestly, it sounds like the opening to a dystopian science fiction film, like where a global mind virus has just suddenly infected random segments of the population.
That is exactly what it looks like, right? You have these wildly disparate moments across geography, culture, and time, and yet there's this invisible thread connecting all of them.
And that thread is?
The answer to what links the shaman, the vandal in New Hampshire, and the clinic intruders in Tokyo is just a single letter.
Q.
Ah, Q, exactly. Today, we are doing a deep dive into the absolute phenomenon of QAnon. This is a movement that began on the absolute furthest, darkest fringes of anonymous internet message boards.
And somehow ballooned into a global movement.
Right, a movement that fundamentally altered the shared reality of millions of people, actually driving real-world geopolitics and physical violence.
It really is a profound case study in human psychology and digital sociology.
It totally is. And so today, we're going to look at the mechanics of this movement. And for our sources on this deep dive, we're drawing on an extensive stack of material.
Oh, yeah, we've got a lot to cover.
We really do. We have an extensive historical and cultural breakdown of the QAnon movement, a sociological paper from the Open University on what's called stigmatized knowledge.
That one is fascinating.
Yeah, the stigmatized knowledge concept is huge. We also have a robust psychological study from Union College that actually measures the specific cognitive traits that predict conspiracy belief. And finally, we'll be pulling insights from a really great video essay on why people believe in phenomena like, lizard people.
Right. We are really going to decode the machinery here. Like, what is actually happening in the human brain and in our social networks that makes these specific narratives so incredibly magnetic to people?
But before we jump into the mechanics of message boards and human psychology, we really need to establish a very firm ground rule for this conversation.
Yes. This is crucial for you, the listener, to understand before we dive in.
Exactly. The history of this movement covers some intensely charged, highly polarized political content. It implicates major figures from across the entire political spectrum.
We're talking people like Donald Trump, Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, George Soros, and just many others.
Right. So we are absolutely not taking any political sides today.
None at all.
Our discussion will impartially report the claims exactly as they were propagated by the movement. We're doing this just to understand the psychological and sociological mechanisms at play.
We are not here to endorse, validate, or invalidate any of the political viewpoints involved.
Exactly. We're simply examining the architecture of a belief system.
And, the architecture is where this gets so fascinating because QAnon, it didn't just drop out of a clear blue sky.
No, it definitely did not.
It evolved from a very specific digital primordial soup. I mean, to understand how a movement gets people to literally storm a Capitol building or attack a medical clinic, you have to understand the environment that birthed it.
Which was the anonymous image boards.
Right. Specifically 4chan and later on 8chan.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Because I want to paint a picture of what 4chan actually is for anyone listening who hasn't ever dared to wade into those waters.
Which is probably for the best, honestly.
Yeah, probably.
Huh.
But look, when we think of social media, we think of Facebook, Instagram, or X.
Right. Platforms where you exist as an individual.
Exactly. On those platforms, you have a profile. You have an avatar, a history of your posts. You have a reputation that you build over time.
People know who you are, or at least your online persona.
But 4chan completely strips all of that away. It is an image board where users post entirely anonymously. Literally every single person is just named anonymous.
So there's zero accountability.
Zero. There is no history. There's no accumulated social credit. It is this chaotic, incredibly fast-moving stream of text and images. And because there are no usernames, an idea cannot survive based on who posted it.
Like you can't just be an influencer and get likes because you're famous.
Exactly. An idea only survives if it is provocative or funny or outrageous enough to keep other people replying to it. If people don't reply, the post just falls off the bottom of the page and is deleted forever.
And that specific environment creates a hyper-competitive marketplace for outrage and irony.
That's a perfect way to put it.
I mean, it bred a culture that was incredibly cynical, often deeply offensive, and highly combative. Users were just constantly trying to outshock one another.
Yet nothing was off limits.
And in that environment, elaborate hoaxes and role-playing games became a primary form of entertainment. And this is exactly where we find the evolutionary missing link to QAnon.
Right. The bridge between earlier internet conspiracies and QAnon was a specific set of threads on 4chan's poll board.
Which stands for politically incorrect.
Yes, the poll board. And specifically, these were the HTG threads, which stood for Human Trafficking General. Now, to understand this, we need to rewind slightly to 2016 and the explosion of Pizzagate.
Oh, Pizzagate. Right.
Yeah. This was a conspiracy theory that emerged after the Democratic National Committee emails, specifically the ones belonging to John Podesta, were hacked and published by WikiLeaks.
Pizzagate is so crucial to this whole timeline because it established the core narrative trope.
How so?
Well, believers combed through thousands of totally mundane emails about, ordering food and organizing campaign events.
Right, just normal office stuff.
Exactly. But they convinced themselves that words like cheese pizza were actually pedophile code words.
Cheese pizza, right. Because of the initials.
Yeah, CP. And so they constructed this incredibly elaborate theory that high-profile politicians were running a child abuse ring out of the basement of a Washington, D.C. pizzeria called Comet Ping Pong.
And the real-world consequence of that was just terrifying. A man named Edgar Madison Welch actually drove all the way from North Carolina to Washington, D.C.
With a gun, right?
Yeah, an AR-15 style rifle.
Yeah.
He walked right into the pizzeria to self-investigate. He thought he was going to rescue the children.
Unbelievable.
And he actually fired the weapon inside the restaurant.
Thankfully, no one was hurt.
Right, thankfully.
Yeah.
And he surrendered to police once he realized there were no children there. And, the building didn't even have a basement.
Which just shows the complete disconnect from reality. But the point with Pizzagate is that it had a hard mechanical limit.
What do you mean by a mechanical limit?
It was entirely based on a finite set of leaked emails. Once you read all of John Podesta's emails, the narrative just stalled. There was no new content to discover. It was a closed loop.
Ah, I see. So it ran out of fuel.
Exactly. And that is where the HTG threads on 4chan completely changed the dynamic.
Right, because the users on those threads stopped relying on external static leaks like the WikiLeaks emails.
Yeah, they started actively generating an ongoing, imagined storyline themselves.
You started having these anonymous posters showing up claiming to be actual child prostitution investigators or government insiders. They were dropping hints and creating this massive collaborative fiction.
And it wasn't just the human trafficking threads doing this.
No?
No, the audience on 4chan had been primed for years by a whole series of role players calling themselves Anons.
Oh, like FBI on.
Exactly. In 2016, a user calling themselves FBI on appeared, claiming to have intimate, high-level knowledge of the investigation into the Clinton Foundation.
And people just believed them.
People hung on to every single word. They were asking this totally anonymous poster for specific predictions.
That's wild.
And then came HLI Anon, which stood for High-Level Insider Anon. There was CIA Anon, WNC Anon, claiming to be inside the White House.
So they were essentially establishing a brand new genre of digital folklore.
Yes, they were actively training the users of these message boards to expect, and more importantly, to trust anonymous entities who claim to be leaking earth-shattering government secrets.
They conditioned the audience to accept that the most highly classified information in the entire world was just being casually dropped onto an anime image board.
Which is absurd when you say it out loud, but within that ecosystem, it made sense.
Which brings us to the exact birth date of Q, October 28th, 2017.
The day it all started.
Right. A user posts on 4chan in a thread titled, Calm Before the Storm, and this user adopts the moniker Q, Clearance Patriot.
What's fascinating here is that the moniker itself is a masterclass in manufacturing instant credibility within that specific subculture.
Because Q clearance is a real thing, right?
Exactly. It's not a made-up term. It is a very real security clearance used by the United States Department of Energy. It grants access to top-secret restricted data, primarily regarding nuclear weapons and materials.
Wow. So by adopting that specific name, The poster wasn't just casually saying, hey, I work for the government.
No, they were heavily implying access to the absolute highest, most sensitive levels of the deep state.
And the phrase calm before the storm, from the title of the thread, that was a deliberate anchor to reality, too.
Right, because Trump had just said that.
Yes. A few weeks prior, Donald Trump was taking a photo with some military leaders, and he just cryptically remarked to the press corps that it was the calm before the storm.
And when the reporters pressed him on it, asking what he meant, he just said, "You'll find out."
Right. So this anonymous poster takes that cryptic real-world moment and uses it to launch this massive narrative.
The transition from something like FBIN to QAnon represents just a monumental shift in how conspiracies operate.
Because the older ones were passive.
Exactly. Earlier theories were completely passive. You watched a documentary about the moon landing, or you read a breakdown of the JFK assassination. You were just consuming a static product.
But QAnon introduced gamification. I look at it through the lens of digital culture, and it is structured exactly like a massively multiplayer online alternate reality game, like an MMO.
Like World of Warcraft.
Exactly like World of Warcraft. In a video game like that, you don't just sit and read the lore of the world. You actively go on quests, you gather items, you solve puzzles to advance the plot.
Right, you're a participant.
Q didn't just log on and say, okay, here's a list of facts about the government. Q would drop incredibly cryptic clues, vague questions, and weird strings of numbers.
And the community even adopted specific terminology for this game.
Yeah, the posts from Q were called crumbs, or breadcrumbs.
And the followers who dedicated hours and hours to analyzing these posts, they called themselves bakers.
Bakers, right, because their job was to take these disconnected crumbs, research them, connect them to current news events, and bake them into dough or bread.
Which basically meant formulating a cohesive, grand narrative out of the noise.
But let me ask you this. Why did this specific Anon stick when so many others faded away? What made Q different from FBI Anon?
Well, the ambiguity of those breadcrumbs is the single most important factor in why Q succeeded, where FBI Anon failed.
Because FBI Anon was too specific.
Yes. FBI Anon made very specific claims and predictions about dates and arrests. When those predictions inevitably failed to materialize in the real world, the illusion shattered and the audience just moved on.
But Q didn't do that.
No, Q's posts became increasingly vague over time. They read almost like bad slam poetry or fragmented spy novel dialogue.
Stuff like watch the water. Right.
Exactly. Watch the water, the clock is ticking. What happens when the military becomes the only way?
So if I give you a highly detailed, specific prediction and it doesn't happen, I'm a fraud.
Right.
But if I just ask a vague question like, watch the water, and then the next day it happens to rain heavily in Washington, D.C., or a pipe bursts into political headquarters, or a Navy ship is deployed.
The followers instantly map your vague statement onto the real-world event.
It's a self-fulfilling prophecy.
It's a massive psychological hook. By intentionally refusing to provide a complete narrative, Q forced the audience to fill in the blanks themselves. The bakers were literally co-authoring the mythology.
They mapped their own pre-existing anxieties, their own political biases, their own religious beliefs directly onto the ambiguous framework that Q provided.
Yes, they became fiercely emotionally invested in the conspiracy because they were the ones actively doing it. It was crowdsourced reality creation.
And when you have millions of people who are deeply invested in an anonymous game master, the obvious question becomes, who was actually behind the keyboard? Who was dropping the crumbs?
Well, investigative journalists, linguists, and documentary filmmakers have spent years tracing the digital footprints.
And what they find?
The consensus is that Q was absolutely not a single military insider. It was likely a changing cast of human operators who deeply understood the mechanics of the platform.
The digital forensics point pretty heavily to early promoters who realized the monetization and influence potential of the grift.
Right. You have figures like Paul Ferber.
Yes, the South African 4chan moderator.
He was instrumental in moving Q's posts to the forefront of the boards early on. And then you have Coleman Rogers, an American who launched live stream channels just to analyze Q's drops and solicit donations.
Didn't Rogers actually slip up on a live stream once?
He did. In one infamous live stream, Rogers appeared to accidentally log into the 8chan board using the exclusive password reserved only for Q.
Wow.
Yeah, he quickly covered it up and denied it, obviously, but the implication was huge.
And eventually the architecture of the movement was heavily suspected to be co-opted by the administrators of the boards themselves, right?
Yes. When Q migrated from 4chan to 8chan and later to 8chan, The platform was completely controlled by an American expatriate named Jim Watkins and his son, Ron Watkins.
And they were operating servers out of the Philippines, I believe.
Correct. And Ron Watkins, who is the administrator of the site, he had exclusive technical control over Q's identity verification.
So he held the keys to the kingdom.
Exactly. And in multiple interviews, Ron Watkins essentially bragged about his ability to manipulate information and perform intelligence training on the public. He would often adopt the exact same cadence and terminology as QAnon camera before just smiling and denying he was the author.
Wow. It really paints a picture of a human architecture behind the digital curtain, just manipulating the mechanics of internet culture to sustain engagement.
But, understanding the delivery system, the image boards, the gamification, the operators, that is only half the battle.
Right. Because to understand why this gripped the human psyche so fiercely that people were literally willing to ruin their lives over it, we have to look at the actual content of the mythology.
Like, what were they actually baking with all those crumbs?
Exactly. Let's break down the core tenets, because the core narrative is grand, it's sweeping, and it's fundamentally terrifying.
It really is. It's built on 3 central pillars.
Okay, let's walk through them.
The first pillar is the absolute belief that the world is secretly controlled by a global cabal of Satan-worshipping, cannibalistic pedophiles.
Just a completely evil elite.
Right. This cabal allegedly operates a global child trafficking ring and includes high-ranking Democratic politicians, Hollywood elites, international business tycoons, and even religious figures.
Okay, and the second pillar centers entirely on Donald Trump, right?
Yes. The narrative posits that Trump was not just a politician who won a regular election, but that he was secretly recruited by top military generals to run for president with the sole specific purpose of dismantling this satanic cabal from the inside.
A secret operative.
Exactly. And the third pillar is the apocalyptic climax of the entire narrative, known as the storm or the event.
The storm.
This was the prophesied day of reckoning when Trump and his military allies would spring this brilliant trap. It promised mass, televised arrests of thousands of cabal members.
Wow.
Yeah, military tribunals at Guantanamo Bay, and widespread executions for treason. And once the cabal was purged, society would enter this utopian era of peace and hidden technologies, which they called the Great Awakening.
I mean, that overarching narrative is wild enough, but the specific hyperfixated spin-offs that the community generated are genuinely disturbing.
They really are.
We are talking about rumors like Frazzle Drip.
Oh, Frazzle Drip, that one was incredibly dark.
Yeah. For anyone who doesn't know, this was a completely fabricated story about a video supposedly found on Anthony Weiner's laptop. The community believed this video showed Hillary Clinton and her aide literally murdering a young girl in a satanic ritual.
And it didn't exist.
It absolutely did not exist. But the rumor was so potent, so widely believed within the community, that actual politicians had to field questions about it from their constituents.
The movement also developed this bizarre fascination with celebrity execution.
Oh, right, like the Tom Hanks thing?
Yes. There were persistent, widely accepted narratives within the community that actors like Tom Hanks had been secretly arrested or even executed by military tribunals when he went into COVID-19 quarantine in Australia.
And what did they think when he showed up on TV later?
They claimed that any subsequent appearances by him were either body doubles, clones, or CGI.
Clones. Just incredible. And then you have the faction in Dallas.
Oh, the Dealey Plaza gathering.
Yes. In late 2021, hundreds of devoted QAnon followers gathered at the grassy knoll in Dealey Plaza, which is the site of John F. Kennedy's assassination.
They stood there for weeks.
Literally weeks, genuinely believing that John F. Kennedy Jr., who, by the way, died in a plane crash in 1999, had actually faked his death, had been secretly working with Donald Trump for 2 decades and was going to literally return from the dead at that exact spot to reinstate Trump as president.
It's tragic, really, but perhaps the darkest and most persistent fixation of the entire movement is the concept of adrenochrome harvesting.
Adrenochrome. Okay, explain this one.
So, the community deeply believed that this elite cabal wasn't just abusing children, but systematically torturing them to extract oxidized adrenaline from their blood.
Oxidized adrenaline.
Right. They claimed the substance, adrenochrome, was consumed by the elites as a psychoactive drug and an anti-aging elixir.
But this is where we have to pause and look at the history. Because as wild as adrenochrome harvesting sounds to a modern ear, the researchers point out that this is not a new idea.
Not at all.
It is new digital software running on ancient, deeply ingrained cultural hardware.
Exactly. The adrenochrome narrative is a direct, modernized descendant of the medieval blood libel.
The blood libel.
Yes. In the Middle Ages, there was this virulent, deeply entrenched anti-Semitic myth that Jewish communities were kidnapping and murdering Christian children to harvest their blood for ritualistic purposes.
Often claiming it was used to bake matzah for Passover, right?
Exactly. And the architectural similarities between that medieval myth and QAnon are completely identical.
You have a shadowy, deeply hated minority or elite group. You have the most innocent, vulnerable members of society, children. And you have a horrific, ritualistic extraction of bodily fluids for power or sustenance.
The historical continuity is actually alarming. In 2022, researchers documented QAnon followers circulating images of a medieval woodcut.
A woodcut, like an old drawing.
Yes, depicting the murder of Simon of Trent. Simon was a young boy in 1475 whose accidental death sparked a massive, horrific blood libel purge against the local Jewish community.
Oh my God.
And modern conspiracy theorists were sharing this 15th century propaganda as literal proof that elite adrenochrome harvesting has been happening for centuries.
That is deeply chilling. And it isn't just medieval history either. The fixation on secret underground satanic rituals is a massive echo of the satanic panic of the 1980s and 1990s.
Oh, absolutely.
During that era, the entire country was gripped by this manufactured hysteria that underground satanic cults were operating daycare centers, abusing children, and performing sacrifices.
It led to massive, life-destroying trials like the McMartin preschool case.
Right. Driven entirely by the controversial and heavily flawed recovered memory movement. We have seen these moral panics repeatedly throughout history, where a community becomes collectively convinced that an invisible demonic network is actively conspiring in the shadows.
And the vocabulary of QAnon is also explicitly religious, drawing heavily on Christian apocalypticism.
Explain that connection.
Well, the concept of the storm perfectly mirrors the biblical judgment day or the flood of Genesis, right? It's a cataclysmic, necessary cleansing of a corrupted earth.
And the Great Awakening.
The Great Awakening echoes the historical religious revivals of American history.
Yeah.
It operates on strict, uncompromising dualism.
Dualism meaning
There's
no nuance.
zero nuance. No gray area, no complex geopolitical reality. It is a cosmic winner-take-all battle between absolute pure good and absolute demonic evil.
So it's not even politics to them anymore.
No. Scholars point out that for many of the most devoted followers, QAnon transcended a political conspiracy and became literal spiritual warfare.
Wow.
One researcher aptly described the anticipation of the storm as a reverse rapture.
A reverse rapture, what does that mean?
Well, instead of the righteous being pulled up into heaven and leaving the earth behind, like in the traditional rapture, the righteous stay and the evil are violently purged from the earth to create a new Eden here.
And that religious apocalyptic framing really explains why debunking the specific claims is so incredibly ineffective.
Exactly. You can't logic someone out of a religious prophecy.
And I want to focus on that because the biological and scientific absurdity of these claims is staggering. I mean, let's just look at adrenochrome.
Right, the chemistry of it.
Adrenochrome is a real chemical compound. It is simply the oxidation of adrenaline. But it is synthesized easily in commercial laboratories by the gallon for basic medical research.
You can just buy it online.
Yes. You could literally buy it from chemical supply catalogs. And it has absolutely zero medical use for anti-aging. It doesn't make you younger.
And as a drug.
As a psychoactive drug, researchers who have synthesized it and tested it say it's practically useless, mostly just causing mild headaches.
So where did the myth come from?
The entire pop culture mythology of adrenochrome comes from a fictional hallucinated scene in Hunter S. Thompson's novel Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas.
A literal fiction book.
Yes. So how does a massive global community of functioning adults completely ignore verifiable basic chemistry?
Because the scientific facts are entirely irrelevant to the function the belief serves.
Wait, really? They just don't care about the chemistry at all?
Not at all. The narrative is not serving a scientific function. It is serving a profound psychological function.
Okay, unpack that for me.
Consider the reality of the modern world for a second. It is vastly complex and terrifyingly abstract. We are dealing with massive systemic inequality, global pandemics, complex supply chain collapses, and intricate geopolitical proxy wars.
Right.
Those are incredibly difficult, exhausting concepts for the human brain to process. You cannot easily point a finger at systemic macroeconomic shifts and be angry at it.
Right, it's just abstract dread.
Exactly, it's abstract dread. But the belief in an evil, satanic cabal harvesting children's blood, that provides a tangible, simplistic, viscerally recognizable face to all that abstract horror.
It gives you a monster with a name and a face.
Yes. It provides an enemy you can point to, and more importantly, an enemy that can theoretically be defeated by a hero. It reduces the unbearable, chaotic complexity of 21st century globalism into a simple, comforting fairy tale of good versus evil.
That transition from the mythological to the internal mental state is where the research gets incredibly revealing. We know what they believe. Now let's dig into who is believing it and why their brains are receptive to it.
This is where we bring in the Union College study.
Right. We're looking at a psychological study from Union College that set out to find the specific cognitive traits that predict generic conspiracy belief. Like, what is actually going on in the brain architecture of a believer?
The researchers identified several key cognitive misfires, and the first is something called hyperactive agency detection, or agenticity.
Now, from an evolutionary standpoint, agenticity makes perfect sense. The human brain evolved to survive in dangerous environments by constantly seeking patterns and assigning agency. So if early humans were walking through the savannah and heard rustling in the tall grass, the ones who assumed the rustling was a deliberate agent, a hungry tiger, they survived.
Even if it was just the wind, they ran away and lived.
Exactly. The ones who assumed it was just a random wind, they got eaten by the tiger. So we are biologically hardwired to perceive intention and design behind random events.
But in the context of modern conspiracy theories, that hyperactive agency detection goes into absolute overdrive.
Right.
The brain completely loses the ability to accept randomness or coincidence. Every single detail, no matter how minute, must have a deliberate designer and a hidden meaning.
And the perfect example of this happened constantly within the QAnon community. A politician would give a speech at a rally, and there would happen to be 17 American flags decorating the stage behind them.
Just a normal stage setup.
Right. Standard event staging dictates you put up a bunch of flags until the stage looks full. But because Q is the 17th letter of the alphabet, believers with hyperactive agency detection looked at that stage and instantly perceived it not as a coincidence of event planning, but as a deliberate, intentional, highly coordinated signal directed specifically at them.
The rustling grass isn't the wind, it's the tiger.
Exactly. The 17 flags aren't decorations. They are a secret communication from the president.
The second cognitive trait the study highlights is equally fascinating, and the actual clinical psychological term for it is bullshit receptivity.
I know it sounds like a joke, but it is a rigorously measured psychological metric, right?
It absolutely is.
Yeah.
Bullshit receptivity measures the tendency for individuals to find profound, deep, spiritual meaning in statements that are syntactically correct, but entirely nonsensical or empty.
How do psychologists even measure that?
They measure this by giving subjects randomly generated, buzzword-heavy phrases. For example, a phrase like, wholeness quiets infinite phenomena, or hidden meaning transforms unparalleled abstract beauty.
Those sound like they mean something, but they're literally just random words.
Exactly. But someone high in bullshit receptivity reads that randomly generated sentence and genuinely thinks, wow, that is incredibly profound. That explains the universe.
So when you take a brain high in bullshit receptivity and you expose it to Q's vague, cryptic, pseudo-military intelligence drops, it is a catastrophic match.
Oh, it's perfect. Q posts something like, the water is deep, patriots are in control, think mirror.
And a receptive brain doesn't see fragmented nonsense. It sees a profound, multidimensional puzzle containing the secrets of the universe.
The vagueness itself is perceived as evidence of profound truth.
Exactly. And the Union College study pairs these cognitive traits, hyperactive agency detection and bullshit receptivity, with a specific personality profile.
Right. They highlight two major predictors for falling into these narratives. And the first is schizotypy.
Now, we should definitely clarify that schizotypy does not mean clinical schizophrenia.
Right. It is a spectrum of personality traits, not a diagnosis of a disorder. Correct. It is a personality dimension characterized by a constellation of tendencies. People high in schizotypy often exhibit intense interpersonal suspiciousness, chronic paranoia, social isolation, and a strong propensity for eccentric ideas or magical thinking.
They naturally distrust conventional explanations and lean toward the esoteric.
Right. And the second massive predictor is a worldview defined by dangerous world beliefs.
Dangerous world beliefs.
This is a fundamental, deeply rooted perception that society is not basically safe or cooperative, but rather that it is chaotic, incredibly fragile, and absolutely teeming with malevolent actors who are actively trying to do harm.
So when you combine all of these elements, hyperactive agency detection, a high receptivity to profound-sounding nonsense, a schizotypal personality leaning toward paranoia, and a terrifying belief that the world is inherently dangerous, You have created an incredibly fertile psychological soil.
A narrative like QAnon, which promises to explain the danger and defeat the malevolent actors, takes root instantly.
But the Union College study includes an experiment that I found incredibly surprising.
The lab experiment.
Yes. The researchers wanted to see if they could actually induce conspiracy beliefs in a laboratory setting. They theorized that if people believe in conspiracies because they feel threatened, they could trigger that belief by using situational threats.
Makes sense on paper.
Right. So they brought subjects into the lab and deliberately reminded them of their own mortality, or they put them in frustrating scenarios designed to make them feel utterly powerless and out of control. They assumed this temporary state of dread would cause the subjects to endorse a conspiracy theory to make themselves feel better.
But the situational threats completely failed. The laboratory experiment did not increase conspiracy endorsement at all.
So if making someone feel powerless or threatened in a sterile lab doesn't cause conspiracy thinking, what is the actual catalyst?
This is where we bring in the analysis from the video essay by Georg Rockel-Schmidt. He argues that a sterile, temporary laboratory setting completely fails to replicate the intense, chronic, deeply ingrained real-world alienation that actually drives these beliefs.
Right, you can't simulate a lifetime of feeling left behind in a 30-minute psychology test.
Exactly. Rockel-Schmidt points to much deeper sociopolitical drivers.
Yeah.
It is not just feeling temporarily powerless. It is a chronic state of feeling marginalized, lacking status, or feeling that your way of life is being aggressively dismantled.
And he highlights two major sociopolitical mindsets that pair with this.
He does. The first is social dominance orientation.
Social dominance orientation.
This is a preference for strict, hierarchical social structures. People high in this orientation believe that certain groups are simply meant to be on top, and they experience profound fear and anger when they perceive low-status groups upsetting that traditional order.
Okay, and the second mindset?
The second mindset is right-wing authoritarianism, which is just a fascinating psychological paradox.
It's entirely contradictory.
It really is. It's characterized by a deep, yearning desire for absolute obedience to a strong, traditional, authoritarian leader who will enforce order and punish deviance. Yet, simultaneously, it involves a profound, virulent distrust of the current government, establishment, or institutional authorities.
So you want a dictator, but you absolutely despise the people currently in charge.
Exactly. When you take an individual who feels disconnected from society, unhappy with their economic or social circumstances, and you equip them with this authoritarian yet distrustful worldview, Rockel-Schmidt argues that a grand conspiracy theory becomes incredibly seductive.
It offers a narrative where their failures are not their own, but the result of a rigged system controlled by monsters.
Right. The conspiracy theory is far simpler and far more palatable than the agonizing truth.
Because the agonizing truth is just existential dread. The terrifying reality is that there is no secret world order pulling the strings. The world is chaotic, rudderless, and influenced by millions of competing, often incompetent interests colliding with one another.
Believing in a hyper-competent, evil global cabal is actually a comforting psychological blanket. It implies that at least someone is in control of the steering wheel, even if they are evil.
Wow. Okay, so psychology gives us the blueprint for the individual vulnerability. We understand the cognitive misfires and the personality traits, but isolated, vulnerable individuals sitting alone in their living rooms do not spontaneously form a global movement that attempts to overthrow government.
No, they don't.
To understand how millions of these individuals coalesce into a unified physical force, we have to transition from the psychology of the individual to the sociology of the group. We have to examine the immense social gravity of what researchers call stigmatized knowledge.
This concept is absolutely central to understanding the resilience of the movement. The Open University paper heavily references Michael Barkun, a political scientist who developed the concept of stigmatized knowledge.
And what exactly does that mean?
This refers to claims, theories, or narratives that are entirely and aggressively rejected by the institutions we traditionally trust to distinguish fact from fiction.
Institutions like universities, mainstream media outlets, government agencies, and the scientific community.
Right. Normally, if the entire scientific community rejects a claim, a rational person assumes the claim is false.
That's right.
But stigmatized knowledge operates on a completely inverted logic. For the conspiracy believer, the very fact that the mainstream establishment rejects the claim becomes the ultimate, undeniable proof that the claim is true.
So the stigma itself is the validation.
Exactly. Their logic is, if this wasn't true, the media and the government wouldn't be trying so incredibly hard to censor it and hide it from us.
It completely insulates the belief from any external debunking. Every single fact check published by a newspaper is just seen as further evidence of the cover-up.
And the Open University paper uses a brilliant concept by sociologist Colin Campbell to explain where this stigmatized knowledge lives and breathes. Campbell calls it the cultic milieu.
I love this concept. The cultic milieu is essentially a permanent, underground, alternative space within society where entirely different, often wildly contradictory oppositional subcultures mix, mingle, and cross-pollinate.
Right. They don't agree on their specific beliefs, but they are deeply united by their shared rejection of the mainstream orthodoxies.
The paper provides some incredibly vivid physical examples of this milieu in action. They analyzed the Bilderberg Fringe Festival in the United Kingdom. This was a massive protest gathering held outside a secretive meeting of global political and financial elites.
And if you walk through that field, the diversity of the crowd was staggering.
Oh, it was a totally wild mix. You had Hare Krishnas in traditional robes handing out free vegetarian food. You had stand-up comedians performing anti-establishment sets. You had New Age practitioners selling spiritual healing crystals and talking about energy fields.
And right next to them,
You had far-left, hardcore, anti-capitalist anarchists protesting corporate greed. And standing right next to them were far-right, hardcore Alex Jones conspiracy theorists protesting the New World Order.
on paper, a New Age crystal healer and a far-right militia member disagree on absolutely everything regarding politics, religion, and society. But in the cultic milieu, they peacefully coexist and even share literature. Why? Because they share a deep, fundamental distrust of the official story.
The enemy of my enemy is my friend.
Exactly. And the paper explores how this dynamic exists across entirely different cultures as well. They look at early hip-hop culture, specifically artists like Chuck D of Public Enemy and the influence of the 5% Nation.
How does that fit into stigmatized knowledge?
Well, these movements utilize counter-knowledge to explicitly and intentionally reject dominant white-controlled narratives surrounding the education system, history, and the media.
I see.
They elevated lived experience, alternative street intellectuals, and alternative historical narratives above anything the mainstream institutions were teaching.
And they applied the exact same lens to religious schisms, too, like the Shudden Buddhist controversy.
Right. This involved a massive splinter group of Western Buddhist monks and nuns who actively protested the Dalai Lama.
They completely rejected his supreme spiritual authority, choosing instead to rely entirely on the teachings of their own alternative, localized, and stigmatized teachers.
In every single one of these cases, Bilderberg, hip-hop counter-knowledge, Shugden Buddhism, the accepted mainstream authority is wholly rejected in favor of an alternative, stigmatized source.
Which brings us to the core mechanism functioning inside this cultic milieu.
Yeah.
Epistemic seclusion. It is a heavy academic term, but it operates on a very simple, recognizable social principle. Trust me, you can't trust them.
Right. We all live in a highly specialized, hyper-complex modern world. Because the total sum of human knowledge is so unimaginably vast, every single one of us is profoundly ignorant about almost everything.
It's true. I do not know how to engineer the microchip in my computer. I do not know how to synthesize the medication I take. I am forced every single day to trust experts.
We all constantly have to choose which epistemic authorities, which sources of knowledge to believe.
But what happens when you decide that the institutions credentialing those experts, the universities, the medical boards, the government agencies, are fundamentally corrupt?
For the QAnon believer, or anyone deeply entrenched in the cultic milieu, trust is no longer distributed based on objective epistemological skills, scientific consensus, or academic credentials.
Trust is placed entirely on social credibility and shared identity within their specific in-group.
They judge the truth of a statement based on who is saying it, rather than the verifiable evidence supporting it.
Exactly. I want to build out an analogy to make this mechanism perfectly clear.
Go for it.
Imagine that every single one of us, we're all forced to navigate through this absolutely pitch black, cavernous room. It is terrifying, and you don't know where you are going.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
The mainstream establishment, science, journalism, academia, is offering you a person holding a very bright, powerful flashlight to guide you safely across the room.
Makes sense to follow the flashlight.
But because you have spent months reading message boards that convince you the person with the flashlight is actually a monster secretly trying to lead you off a cliff, you violently refuse their help.
You reject the illumination because you totally distrust the source.
Right. And instead, you turn to the person stumbling in the dark right next to you. They don't have a flashlight either. They are just as blind as you are. But they are holding your hand, they are speaking your language, and they feel like a friend.
So you choose to follow them into the dark.
And worse, as you stumble together, you mutually reinforce each other's fears, convincing each other that the guy with the flashlight is actually trying to blind you.
The shared darkness becomes the very thing that bonds you together.
You are choosing social comfort and tribal belonging over objective illumination.
That is epistemic seclusion in a nutshell. And when we look at this massive self-reinforcing network of people stumbling in the dark together, we have to ask the ultimate investigative question, cui bono? Who actually benefits from this massive fracture in reality?
Obviously, there is a financial angle. You have grifters, live streamers, and merchandise vendors making millions selling QAnon t-shirts, flags, and supplement pills.
Sure.
But the Open University paper argues something much deeper. The primary beneficiaries of the QAnon conspiracy theory aren't some shadowy global cabal, and it isn't even the people selling the merchandise.
The people who extract the most value from this belief system are the believers themselves.
The psychological and social utility of the belief is immense. Committing to this conspiracy provides fierce, unbreakable group solidarity for people who previously felt entirely isolated.
It provides a crystal clear, heroic, moral identity. You are no longer an underemployed, marginalized person. You are a digital soldier actively participating in a global war against ultimate evil.
It provides endless, interactive entertainment, like a high-stakes puzzle that you are uniquely qualified to solve. It gives them a profound sense of purpose. It acts as an impenetrable psychological shield against the crushing, random anxieties of an unpredictable world.
However, while the benefits of the belief system remain neatly contained within the psychological and social realms of the followers, the consequences of this belief system have violently ruptured into the physical world.
Right. This phenomenon did not stay confined to the digital petri dish of 4chan and 8chan. It bled into our hospitals, our streets, and our capitals.
And the ultimate catalyst, the event that took QAnon from a fringe American political subculture to a massive global crisis, was the COVID-19 pandemic.
The pandemic created the absolute perfect storm of the exact situational and psychological factors we've been discussing today.
Overnight, millions of people were subjected to unprecedented physical isolation. They were trapped in their homes, glued to their screens.
They were experiencing pervasive existential anxiety about a deadly invisible virus, coupled with devastating economic uncertainty and a total loss of personal control.
It poured jet fuel onto the fire. Our sources detail how the QAnon movement, which had previously been hyper-focused on American political deep state theories, rapidly mutated.
It aggressively absorbed the massive, pre-existing anti-vaccine and alternative health discourse. QAnon influencers began aggressively promoting MMS Miracle Mineral Solution.
Which, we should be very clear, is not a medicine. It is literally industrial bleach, chlorine dioxide.
Yes, they were telling their followers to drink industrial bleach as a miracle cure for COVID-19 to avoid the medical establishment.
And because the pandemic was a truly global shared experience, the movement exploded internationally.
Right, the localized American politics were suddenly stripped away. And the core mythology of a global elite cabal resonated everywhere. A researcher analyzing the spread found active QAnon Facebook groups in 71 different countries.
The movement proved its terrifying ability to localize and adapt to different cultural anxieties.
We saw the rise of JANON in Japan. They localized the deep state to Japanese politicians and integrated alternative spirituality.
And this wasn't just harmless online chatter in Japan.
No. The Tokyo Metropolitan Police actually arrested members of a massive JANON group known as Yamato Q because they coordinated physical break-ins at clinics that were providing COVID-19 vaccines, terrorizing the medical staff there.
In Europe, the mutation was equally dangerous. In Germany, the QAnon narrative seamlessly merged with the pre-existing far-right Reichsbürger movement, which believes the modern German state is an illegitimate corporation.
And the overlap was so complete that devoted QAnon adherents were actively involved and subsequently charged in a highly organized, real-world plot to launch a violent coup d'etat and overthrow the German government in 2022.
This rapid, destabilizing global expansion caught the attention of major geopolitical players. And this is where the conspiracy narrative intersects with actual calculated information warfare.
The research stack cites a comprehensive data report from the Soufan Center, a highly respected national security research organization.
Right. They ran an analysis of over 160,000 QAnon posts across various platforms between 2020 and 2021.
And the data they uncovered is chilling. They found that a staggering 1/5 of those QAnon posts did not originate from concerned American citizens. They originated from foreign actors, primarily state-backed networks in Russia and China.
So why would foreign governments care about 4chan conspiracy theories?
Because it is the ultimate tool for asymmetric warfare. State-backed media networks and bot farms were actively amplifying, translating, and aggressively pushing these conspiracy theories into the mainstream.
They weaponized the movement with the deliberate strategic goal of sowing profound societal discord, destroying trust in Western democratic institutions, and compromising legitimate political processes.
They didn't have to invent the virus, they just had to spread it.
Exactly. And the culmination of that online rhetoric, the psychological manipulation, the geopolitical amplification, and the intense social radicalization finally erupted into catastrophic physical violence in the United States on January 6, 2021.
The months of digital drumbeating about stolen elections and the impending storm led directly to the violent attack on the U.S. Capitol.
QAnon was not just tangentially present that day. It was central to the iconography and motivation of many of the rioters.
The sources explicitly document the heavy presence of Q-related clothing, banners, and emblems throughout the mob. The most visually arresting figure of the entire day, the man we talked about in the very beginning, Jake Angeli, widely known as the QAnon shaman, became the global face of the riot.
He stood right on the Senate days.
He did. But beyond the bizarre spectacle, the consequences were tragically lethal. Ashley Babbitt, a rioter who was shot and killed by Capitol Police while actively trying to smash through the barricaded doors of the Speaker's lobby, was a deeply committed, fully radicalized QAnon follower.
Her digital footprint was entirely consumed by the mythology.
The day before she marched on the Capitol, she literally tweeted, "The storm is here."
She genuinely believed the apocalyptic prophecy she had read on message boards was finally manifesting in reality, and she gave her life for it.
But the reality of January 7th was a profound shock to the system. The prophecy failed.
The military did not step in. The mass arrests of the cabal did not happen.
The televised tribunals never materialized. Donald Trump left Washington, and Joe Biden was inaugurated. The storm never arrived.
So we have to ask, what happens to a deeply entrenched apocalyptic movement when the promised apocalypse unequivocally fails to materialize on the world stage?
The researchers detail this post-Q era, and it is a study in cognitive dissonance. The anonymous entity known as Q essentially vanished.
The posters stopped dropping crumbs entirely, save for a few brief, incredibly low engagement posts in late 2022 that largely fizzled out and were ignored by the core community.
But the movement itself did not die. Psychological studies of apocalyptic cults going all the way back to the 1950s show that when a prophecy fails, deeply invested believers rarely admit they were wrong.
The psychological cost is just too high. Instead, they rationalize. The beliefs mutate.
That is exactly what happened here. The movement splintered and rapidly evolved. Following the violence of January 6th, major social media platforms like Twitter and Facebook executed massive crackdowns, deleting tens of thousands of QAnon accounts.
The followers didn't log off, though. They just migrated to unmoderated alt-tech platforms like Telegram and Gab.
And in those darker corners, the mythology fractured into bizarre new offshoots. We saw the rise of the Sabmic network.
Oh, Sabmic. That was weird.
It was an incredibly strange operation created by a German artist who actively tried to merge the existing QAnon beliefs with a brand new mythology centered around an allegedly prophesied leader named Sabmic, essentially trying to step into the power vacuum left by Q.
But the most significant and arguably most dangerous evolution of the movement is what researchers at Vice News pointed out in our materials.
Which is what?
The community eventually realized they no longer needed Q. They didn't need the anonymous poster anymore. The vast network of podcast hosts, live streamers, and influencers stepped directly into the power vacuum. They became the new authority figures.
And the core tenets of the mythology, the pervasive belief in a satanic deep state, the stolen elections, the hidden cabals, simply became a ubiquitous, if slightly watered down, part of mainstream political discourse. It was normalized.
Which perfectly illustrates a brilliant point made by researcher Travis Few. He compared QAnon to a highly addictive, incredibly immersive video game.
Right.
This game promised everyday, alienated, marginalized people a starring role in a world historical, bloodless revolution to save humanity.
And when the original anonymous developer of that game abandoned it, the players didn't stop playing.
No, they were too addicted to the community and the dopamine of the puzzle.
Yeah.
They simply started writing their own DLC, their own downloadable content to keep the game and their shared reality alive.
When we zoom all the way out and look at the massive scope of what we have discussed today, it is genuinely staggering. We have witnessed a masterclass in how ancient mythological hardware, the anti-Semitic blood libel of the Middle Ages, the terrifying apocalyptic prophecies of ancient religious text, the strict dualism of pure good versus pure evil was successfully loaded with brand new, hyper-efficient digital software.
It was weaponized by the gamified, anonymous architecture of the modern internet, accelerated by a traumatizing global pandemic, and fueled entirely by our deepest, most vulnerable psychological mechanisms.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what does this all mean for you, the listener? It means recognizing that every single human brain, including yours and mine, is fundamentally, biologically wired to seek patterns in the noise.
Our hearts are desperately wired to seek community, belonging, and a sense of heroic purpose.
When those two fundamental human needs collide with a digital landscape that is algorithmically designed to manipulate our attention and feed us exactly what we want to hear, we are all profoundly vulnerable to epistemic seclusion.
If we aren't careful, any of us could find ourselves grabbing the hand of the person in the dark room, actively fighting against the people trying to turn on the lights.
And that leaves us with a final and frankly chilling thought to consider long after this deep dive ends. We have just spent a significant amount of time examining the catastrophic global fallout that occurred when a single anonymous human poster or a small group of human operators created a gamified, interactive conspiracy that successfully fractured the shared reality of millions of people.
But as we move rapidly into an era of incredibly advanced generative artificial intelligence, the landscape is changing. What happens when the ultimate epistemic authority, the entity dropping the breadcrumbs and guiding the narrative, is no longer a human with limited bandwidth, but a completely automated, infinitely patient algorithm?
Oh, wow.
If our precise psychological vulnerabilities, our hyperactive agency detection, our bullshit receptivity, our desperate need for belonging can be perfectly mapped, measured, and targeted by AI in real time, are we headed toward a future where every single individual is fed their own perfectly curated, beautifully bespoke, entirely fictional reality? And if so, does the very concept of a shared objective human truth become completely obsolete?
The human mind is not a clean machine. It is messy, it is desperate for meaning, and it is easily led astray when it feels threatened. And as the technology designed to capture our attention gets exponentially smarter, navigating that reality is only going to get harder. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the architecture of belief. Keep questioning the narratives, keep analyzing the algorithms, and please constantly challenge yourself to step outside your own information bubbles. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.
This is Seek and Explain. Like, comment, and subscribe, and enjoy your stay.